It's been an explosive week in the election campaign where political factions on the left and right have never seemed further apart.
But in attempting to claim the centre ground, have Labour and the Conservatives left themselves open to division? I'm Nish Kumar.
And I'm Coco Khan, and this is Pod Save the UK.
It is a jam-packed show today. We will be checking in with the former Labour leader and independent candidate for Islington North, Jeremy Corbyn, and discussing the toxicity of Parliament with retiring SNP MP Mhairi Black. But first...
He knows inflation is going to go back up. He knows energy prices are going to go back up in the autumn. That's what he's not telling you. So he says the plan is working, but I don't think he believes the plan is working, because if he thought the plan is working, he wouldn't have called this election right now.
Rishi Sunak.
I think it's slightly ironic, because from the moment I got this job, Keir Starmer was telling me, call an election, call an election. And now that we've called an election, he's saying, oh, no, don't have an election, because I don't want to tell you what I'm going to do.
And
this is the choice. This is the choice
Sunak
for everybody. The plan is working. Of course I know everyone is only just starting to feel the benefits of it, but inflation is back to normal, wages are growing, taxes are now being cut. Keir Starmer would put all that progress at risk. He would put up everyone's taxes by £2,000.
That's Sunak and Starmer going head-to-head at the ITV Leaders' Debate on Tuesday evening. It's been described as two centrist dads talking about centrist dad things. And there was also a lot of fear-mongering around a £2,000 tax rise from Sunak. He said it was calculated independently by the Conservative Party. He threw the number around a lot, but it's not so clear-cut, is it, Nish?
No, it's bollocks. It's bollocks. Like, listen, I got home and I felt obliged to watch, for professional reasons, the debate. It was some of the worst fucking television I've ever seen in my entire life. And I speak as somebody who has made some truly appalling television. It was heinous. The format of it, they both had 45 seconds to respond. At points, it was hard to discern what was being said because everyone was just yelling over each other. I very rarely feel comfortable speaking for the majority of the country. I think I have displayed on many occasions that my views are out of step with most people that live in Britain. But on this occasion, I feel very comfortable to say, fuck me. Fucking hell. It was bad stuff in general. I think the most shameful element of it all was this claim that Rishi Sunak repeated again and again that independent civil servants had found that if Labour win the election, the average household is going to pay £2,000 more in tax. Now, as we record on Wednesday, the Labour Party has just said that Sunak should apologise for lying 12 times about its tax plans. The figures are all based on analysis that was done by some independent civil servants, but with information that was given to him by Conservative Party special advisors. So they took information from Conservative Party special advisors, and based on that analysis, you pay £2,000 more a month. But it is not impartial information. So what he did was lie and lie and lie again. That lie has been reprinted uncritically in the most effective propaganda operation outside of a full-blown dictatorship we've ever seen, which is the British press. The Telegraph, the Mail, they've all repeated the same horse shit. I have so many different and conflicting feelings about this election. We've talked so much about our conflicting feelings about the Labour Party and where they are. I want these fucking people gone. I want to see the back of this fucking Conservative Party. I think Sunak's lying yesterday was shameful. I also think, as a side issue, he is a genuine threat to this country because of what he is doing around the climate. There was a question posed about the climate crisis and the fact that he has politicised a conversation about the climate crisis by saying that it sets up a conflict between affordability and the ability to deliver climate change is an absolute disgrace. I want him gone. I can't stand them. He lied. He politicised climate change. The whole thing was just a sorry spectacle.
It was,
anyway.
Yeah. No,
talk for a second.
No, I agree. Like it was, I certainly did not enjoy watching it. It was, I agree that the format of only giving them 45 seconds was not quite enough. Something I did notice though, when they talked about housing, which in my view is possibly one of the biggest, maybe the biggest issues facing the UK. They didn't talk about renters once. They only talked about home ownership, and that really made me feel like you are reflecting only one demographic that is the only one that matters. And traditionally, the younger are better represented at this moment in time by more left-wing thinking and ideas. You didn't get a look in. However, I think we should talk about how the debate wasn't actually the biggest story of the week. We do need to talk about, I'm sorry, Nish, I know we hate talking about him, but there was an announcement, wasn't there, from the populist far-right party Reform?
Yes, Nigel Farage has returned to British politics. He has announced that he is standing as a candidate in Clacton, which is very interesting because earlier this year when he was claiming that he wouldn't stand, one of the things that he told a Times interviewer was that he couldn't imagine spending his nights in Clacton. He specifically said that. You won't be hearing his voice at any point on our programme for this entire election cycle. I think we should make that very clear. It's obviously something that needs to be discussed because he is poison in the water of our country. And bear in mind, our country already has human shit in it. It is water supply. The last thing we need is fucking Nigel Farage. Even in our metaphorical water supply, there's fucking shit in it. But what I would say is we won't be playing his voice. We'll be discussing it, but we won't play his voice because I think it might cause me to spontaneously combust.
Well, that is something we definitely want to avoid. It has been interesting because a couple of our listeners, jokingly, I think we should say, did point to the fact that last week we made this point that we were, not going to talk about him, and then he bloody announced himself, so now we absolutely have to do it. So, one school of thought might be that, Nish, this is all your fault. How are you feeling?
Yes, I have been blamed by several listeners because I sort of celebrated his departure from politics and said that media organisations should not give him any attention. Several listeners have contacted me accusing me of having encouraged him to go back into politics so that he could be covered by the media again. The only thing I would say in response to that is I'm pretty sure he doesn't listen. I'm pretty confident Nigel Farage is not a listener to this programme.
I'd say that was a pretty sure bet. So turning our attention towards Labour, a Sky News poll said that Keir Starmer could be heading to Downing Street with the biggest majority for 100 years with a predicted Tory wipeout.
This also has been a difficult week for Labour in terms of its purging of the left of the party. So we did mention this on the show last week, but the treatment of the first black woman in the British Parliament, the Labour MP Diane Abbott, has been a rollercoaster. She was cleared to run after finally having the Labour whip returned after an unexplained months-long hold-up of the results of an investigation into her behaviour. Then she was suddenly deselected, anonymous briefings leaked out against her, rumours spread of a denied peerhood, and then, after days of will they, won't they, her candidacy was reconfirmed on Tuesday. The whole thing was not a good look, but that isn't where it stopped.
No, so the planned ousting of Abbott looked like an attempt to purge the old guard of the left, but there was another striking deselection on Wednesday evening. So that was Faiza Shaheen. She's a young left-wing economist. She's often referred to as a Corbynite. She's a strong campaigner in her electorate. She ran against the Tory hardliner Ian Duncan Smith last year, and she actually made some very strong gains. She was one of a few Labour MPs who was standing to actually achieve that. So for all intents and purposes, she was a strong candidate. And then suddenly, at the 11th hour, she was deselected.
Listeners to last week will also remember that Ian Duncan Smith may be the cause of politically induced vaginal dryness. I'm not going to explain that any further. Go back and listen to last week for full context. We don't have time to get into it. But Shaheen revealed her deselection in an emotional interview to BBC Newsnight, which was a tough listen.
Honestly, I'm just so shocked right now to be treated this badly after being such an active member of the party. And, we were one of the tiny number, 6 Tory-held seats in 2019 that had a swing to Labour.
We should say for listeners, that was an interview conducted on Newsnight, and one of the other panellists was PSUK's very own Coco Khan.
Yes, so I was in the room, and I have to say, it's emotional watching the video, but in the studio, oh my goodness, it was, it was chilling. Everyone went completely silent. You were watching someone in very clear anguish, despair. You were watching them process it at the same time. The sense of betrayal was really, really palpable.
Shaheen has now resigned from the Labour Party and is running as an independent. Here is what Labour's campaign coordinator Pat McFadden had to say about the deselection, speaking to Michelle Hussein on BBC Radio 4's Today programme.
Is this the way that Keir Starmer's Labour Party treats people who've worked to build support in constituencies over years? Well, the process for all candidates is they require approval from the NEC, and that's a process we all go through. I mean, I can't comment really on her case or any individual one because I'm not personally involved in that.
I think it's worth saying, if anyone's listening to this wondering why this deselection story matters, I think it's ultimately because how Shaheen and Abbott have been treated is vastly different to other MPs who, yes, have done things wrong, have said things that are wrong, and have been forgiven and allowed to continue. As it happens, those who are not close to Keir Starmer also represent more progressive views and represent an electorate at this moment in time don't seem to have anyone standing up for them or sharing their views.
Yeah, I think it's also worth saying that it robs people in the country of representation, people who have certain views about subjects like nationalisation, subjects like increased taxes on the wealthy. It robs them of representation, and the Labour Party should be a broad church that accommodates room for those perspectives. But it's also incredibly important for the Labour Party in government, because the Labour Party coming into power is going to face a really, really difficult set of circumstances. And it may well need a wider support base to govern than it needs to win an election, okay? Because there's a lot of people who will be voting for it simply as a vehicle of getting rid of the Conservative Party. But once the Labour Party is in power, it may well find itself, Keir Starmer may well find himself isolated because he has shaken off or alienated the natural allies of the Labour Party. And we've seen what happens when voters lend their vote to a party. There's a huge sense that in the 2019 election, lots of people lent their vote to the Conservative Party. But that means that that rental period can expire very, very quickly. And actually what you need to rely on at points is your core support and your core base. And if you are cleaving off bits of your core base by alienating them, it might be a fine tactic to win an election, but it might be building unstable foundations for a potential government.
I think it is also worth just mentioning a point quickly. We can't talk about Faiza, Shaheen and Diane Abbott without mentioning that they are both women of colour.
Yeah.
And I think, especially when we're talking about Diane Abbott, who's somewhat an icon.
100%.
Decades-long career, our G&T queen, as my friend calls her. It's really impossible to underestimate how much that makes black voters and other voters of colour feel.
Well, look, while we're on the subject of factional disputes within the Labour Party, I have a strong suspicion our next guest may have some thoughts on this. Joining us now is the former leader of the Labour Party that took them to the last two elections and now the independent candidate for Islington North. Welcome, Jeremy Corbyn.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Good morning. So you're about to post your nomination today. How does it feel to be standing as an independent?
We're off to the town hall where I've been many times before to put the nomination papers in. And it feels like a correct step, and I feel very happy and very confident about it all. Obviously, being an independent is different from being a Labour candidate, and this weekend we'll be producing our manifesto, which will be the policies that I want to see enacted at a national level to benefit the people of my constituencies.
Is that Islington Town Hall?
We're going to Islington Town Hall, yeah.
I've done stand-up comedy there, and it feels very strange that electoral business is happening in places that I've done stand-up comedy.
What, in the Assembly Hall next door? Yeah,
I don't think there's many places that I do stand-up comedy generally that national political business can take place in, largely because they're all rooms that smell vaguely of piss.
Well, we should rent out rooms in the House of Commons for stand-up comedy. It'd be more fun than the Chamber.
Listen, I just wanted to talk to you about the deselection of Faiza, Shaheen and obviously Diane Abbott, whether she was going to stand or not going to stand. What's your reaction been?
Well, I'm really shocked by it all. I know Faiza very well. I've campaigned with her in previous elections, and I think she's made a great contribution to political economic thought and would be a fantastic MP for her community. I think she's really, really good. And the way she's been treated is absolutely shocking, and the revelations about the interview which removed her. And I just felt for her the sort of personal shock she was feeling. And likewise, Diane. I mean, Diane has been an MP since 1987, incredible determination to speak up for communities in Hackney, but obviously in a wider scale, and then threatened with removal and said the party's got to move on from her and so on. And eventually, I think they just sort of got fed up with all the hassle, backed off, and I understand she's now the candidate.
In a recent interview with The Times, Keir Starmer said, I think you win from the centre ground. The centre ground is where most people are. People don't like the extremes of the right or the left. Do you think there is any reason in that argument?
Well, I think it is a false argument. Surely you have to look at the situation facing the people. You have to look at the levels of inequality and poverty within our society and say, well, actually, what are we going to do about it? And I hope, but I'm not really expecting it, that we have a Labour manifesto coming out which actually pledges to do something about that, because working class living standards have fallen by 20% in the past 15 years. All public services are under strain, the health service is being privatised, and the debt level of young people who've been to university is massive, and the housing costs of everybody is very, very high and getting worse. And I just don't see the radical policies that are necessary to bring about some changes.
Can I ask you, right, sometimes... This is the sort of person I am. I like to just sit around in my flat, talk about the Labour Party with my mates. That's
Really?
me.
That is, I can confirm
You're
that's
joking
true.
me here. You're serious?
I
Every
don't.
night you and your mates sit around and talk about the Labour Party.
Oh, right, okay, Jeremy, not every night, okay? Come on. But yes, it is a conversation that comes up. And one of the things that happens all the time is like, look, you know, whatever happens, the Labour Party have to win. And once they're in, then we can sort of push them to the left. Or another idea is that once they win, you know, they can do things with a bit of a wink to the voters, being like, yeah, we're going to say all this, but once we get in, we'll do stuff. What do you think of that line of reasoning?
Well, it's a very interesting line of reasoning. The trouble is history doesn't support it at all. The pressures on an incoming Labour government are huge. The massive pressures from big commercial interests, City of London and so on, are huge on an incoming government. And all of those pressures are about defending the status quo rather than improving living standards of the poorest people. And so I think you've got to be honest with people. If you seriously intend to bring in a real living wage, you seriously intend to put a great deal of resources and democracy into health and education and housing, then say so, and you'll get support for it.
We have a question for you from one of our friends of the pod, Alfie Kerr. He says, do you believe that if you'd stepped aside sooner, a different Labour leader could have won the critical 2019 election? Or do you believe that there was no chance regardless?
Well, the 2019 election was forced upon us. I was under enormous pressure within the Labour Party, and obviously the whole Brexit issue was massive, and it was always going to be a problem for the Labour Party. 2/3 of Labour voters voted Remain, but a third voted Leave, and in the Parliamentary Labour Party it was an even bigger majority that way. It would be impossible to win without getting support from both sides.
Well, we know from our listeners and obviously my mates in the kitchen that lots of
your mates in the kitchen who talk about the Labour Party all the time.
Exactly. And they are a very important group that I live
Coco,
for.
I just want you to consider that Jeremy Corbyn thinks you talk about the Labour Party too much.
Oh, God, what a read. Oh, no. Well, look, I know that many left-wing voters feel just kind of politically homeless at the moment. Do you think that progressive voters can still look towards the Labour Party in terms of, you know, what we said earlier, once they get in, you can push them a little bit. The infrastructure's still there. It's never been perfect, has it? The leadership's often had problems, but it's a big old church and it's a big body. Do you think there's still a home for left-wing people there?
Well, there ought to be, but increasingly it's people on the left who've been pushed out. Left candidates have been selected, like Faiza and others that have been pushed out, and that makes it a less attractive and possible place. But in reality, politics isn't always just about what happens within political parties and the movements within them. It is about wider movements in society. Now, all the strikes that happened last year, of rail, mail, and so on, all the different groups that took industrial action, particularly health workers, none of that was within the Labour Party. All of that was without it. And none of those groups have gone away. None of those demands have gone away. So an incoming Labour government has got to factor in, all those kind of pressures that are going to come from outside.
Even then, obviously taking into account, and it's something that we often stress on this show, that politics doesn't just happen in Westminster, it happens by ordinary people exerting pressure on political representatives. But even in those contexts, there was still a conversation between the left and the right wings of the Labour Party, and there was a push and pull, and it has sort of had a kind of broad church feel to it. Isn't it important that some of that is maintained? And also, do you feel any sort of sense of responsibility for the kind of fracturing of the relationship between the left and the centre of the party?
Well, I stepped down after the 2019 election. The leadership election took place. Both candidates, the leading candidates, put forward their proposals. Both accepted the basic terms of both the manifestos we'd just had. Sir Keir Starmer got elected and has rapidly repudiated a lot of those, which I think is very disappointing. I mean, it's not always popular to talk about anti-poverty strategies and so on. But if we want to live in a cohesive, coherent society, you've got to give hope to people. And that means you have to actually kick over the traces a bit in order to bring about equality.
I want to ask you, given that you're sitting as an independent, it feels like a good time to talk to you about our electoral system and proportional representation. So we've actually had a listener question in from Liam McGrath, who says he feels like we have a real opportunity to change the electoral system for the better. And then he says this, which I think is a very interesting point. Perhaps Labour wouldn't have to lurch quite as hard to the centre to win power if forming left-wing coalitions, like in other proportional systems, was the standard way of forming governments. And I do think it's an interesting point to raise specifically with you, because in a post on your website in 2023, you said, I cannot support a move to proportional representation in isolation without a wider set of progressive changes being made at the same time. And you think what's more urgent is having a directly, proportionally and fully elected upper house representing every part of the UK. Have your views changed at all on that front?
I've been thinking about this quite a lot, and indeed I think we need a federal offer to people across the country, which would mean that you'd have Devo Max on offer in Scotland with parliamentary powers for the Scottish Parliament, ditto Wales.
So that's going further with this system of devolution that was started under the Blair government.
Indeed so.
And has led to the kind of creation of the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Parliament.
No, I supported what the Blair government did on devolution. And that would mean you'd have to then look at devolution within England. Now, I thought about this quite a lot, because previous efforts at setting up a sort of super local government, John Prescott tried it in the northeast in the latter part of the Blair and Brown governments, and it was roundly rejected on a referendum. I think what we should have is regional government in England, based probably on the English economic zones, of which there are 7. And so you would have a devolution of Scotland, Wales and English regions. And that would help to bring about a better system of decision-making and investment, because far too much investment still goes into London and the South East. The region that does the worst is actually the East Midlands. I think that would help. Now, moving on from that to the election system. For the House of Commons, there's interesting debate here. I've been a constituency MP all my life, and I love and value that very close relationship with the constituency. But a first-past-the-post system doesn't necessarily bring about democracy. So you could either have a system of runoff ballots so that the winning candidate would have to get 50%. That wouldn't necessarily make an awful big difference to the party structure in the House of Commons. A more diverse system, such as an additional member, might well bring about that fairer system. It's what happens in London with the London assemblies elected by direct constituencies, and then you have the London-wide vote, which evens it out between the parties. And it would mean that if we had that, there would be a diversity of political representation in the House of Commons. You would have more left-wing parties represented, but it would also, and this is an area that people don't always want to address, it would possibly mean that some of the far-right parties could also get representation out of it. And so, I mean, you have to sort of weigh all these things up, but I don't think the current system in a multi-party society is actually tenable.
So does that mean you've come around to some version of proportional representation?
Absolutely, I have, yes. I mean, I've thought about it a lot, and I would like to see a form of proportional representation brought in.
Can I ask you about your exit from the Labour Party, just before we ask you about your thoughts about the upcoming election? In the kind of dispute around the findings around anti-Semitism in the party, you made a statement where you described anti-Semitism as absolutely abhorrent, and one anti-Semite is one too many in the Labour Party, which is a sentiment I think we can all agree with. And then you went on to talk about the ideas of anti-Semitism being exaggerated or a factional attack, which are the comments that essentially Keir Starmer has seized on and used to justify your eventual expulsion from the party. I want to just separate the politics from this for a moment. Do you reflect that it would have been better in that moment to acknowledge the problem that had happened, which you described as absolutely abhorrent, and simply just apologise for the hurt that was caused to Jewish voters and then move on?
I felt I had to put it in the context of my own experience. When I became leader, there wasn't a system in place in the party for dealing with what were some disgusting and disgraceful things that had been said by various people, but there weren't very many of them at that time. And so I set up a system for dealing with it. And as the EHRC report acknowledges, the system improved and cases were dealt with.
But again, I'm separating the politics of it. Can you not see that in some ways caveating that statement might have hurt some people's feelings?
It went both ways. Yes, some people, I had to explain to them what I meant and why I said it, and I got quite a lot of emails about it. But I also got an awful lot of people saying, thank goodness you've made that statement, because you've made clear what your own views are, but you've also pointed out that some of the people that were opposing you were exaggerating the issue. Look, anti-Semitism is a vile thing in society. We all know that, and I say that, and I'm sure you would agree with that. And I made that very, very clear all along. But also, there cannot be a hierarchy of racism. Islamophobia is vile and evil. Anti-black racism is vile and evil. Diane and others, and Dawn Butler, have all suffered the most appalling levels of racist abuse within our society. And sadly, there hasn't been as much defence of particularly black women MPs as there should have been in our national media.
Jeremy, tell you what, I've got to say, you could not pay me to be Labour leader. That sounds not fun at all.
And that's coming from someone who recreationally talks about the Labour Party as a hobby.
Yes, but it is also an enormous privilege and an enormous honour.
Well, the reason I asked you about this is, one of the things I think is really fascinating about the Labour leader role is, in a way, every leader will encounter problems, and to what extent do they have the faith of enough of the voters that they give them, they give them the benefit of the doubt, and they say, they're trying their best. I don't know where Starmer is with any of that. But nonetheless, it's a tough job. I think we can all agree. Have you got any advice for Keir Starmer?
Listen to a wide variety of people who will probably drive you crazy with contradictory opinions and advice and so on. And remember that all bureaucracies, be they the Labour Party, the civil service, parliamentary democracies and so on, have a big instinct for self-preservation and self-survival. It's a self-preservation society. Therefore, they are often opposed to any form of change.
On a national level, do you want Labour to win the election?
I want the Tories defeated, so yes. And I
Because it must be hard, right? You're standing against the Labour Party, but at the same time, this is an organisation that you've had a
I'm
relationship
standing as
with.
the independent candidate for Islington North, and I'm knocking on doors all the time. I'm meeting people I've met over many years, talking to them about their issues and problems, and explain to them why this has come about because of the way in which the party's behaved towards me and to Islington, and that if they elect me again, it's the same me they're electing.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you so much
You've
for
got to
joining
go nominate
us
yourself.
on Pod Save
I'm off to the town hall now. Lovely. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you
Been a
so
pleasure.
much.
Bye now.
There's a mighty long list of MPs standing down in the next election, likely for a variety of reasons. But it's an unfortunate reflection of Parliament that for some, the driving force in leaving is due to toxic workplace culture. Mhairi Black is currently the MP for Paisley and Renfrewshire South and Deputy Leader of the SNP, but is standing down after this election. So Mhairi, welcome to Pod Save the UK. Last time you were on our show, you said that you were looking forward to the peace of retirement and your PlayStation.
Yes.
Is that still your top priority, given that you have the whole summer, Mhairi's big summer?
Hot girl summer. It's hot girl summer time.
Oh my God, yes. Now's your time, the retirement.
That's it. And it's good actually, because since dissolution, I'm no longer an MP. I'm no longer deputy leader or anything. I'm just a mouth.
You're just a regular civvy.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, listen, as someone who's been a mouthful his entire adult life, let me tell you, there's money to be made. How do you feel about, because we talked a lot about, the things you're looking forward to last time we were on the show, but obviously, surely you can't have assumed this would come around this quickly, right?
Oh, this was music to my ears. Absolutely. Like, the only way I can describe it, because it's roughly about a year ago that I announced publicly that I wasn't standing, and it felt like sitting in the airport but your flight's delayed for months, and then all of a sudden it's right, go to the gate, we're bored. So it's some buzz. I'm still buzzing as I'm packing up. It's great.
The OOO is on.
That's it.
We were talking... to get back into the sticky topic of Westminster politics, we were talking about Keir Starmer's poor handling, or what we perceive to be his poor handling of candidate selection for this election. What do you think about this idea that elections can only be won from the centre ground? I mean, I know the SNP is a sort of complicated beast because of the issue of Scottish independence, but it's certainly a party that has enjoyed political success whilst espousing what we would consider to be broadly a progressive platform in the last sort of half decade, particularly under the leadership of Nicola Sturgeon. What do you feel about this idea that you can only win elections from the centre?
I think it's a dangerous precedent, because if you don't have choice in an election, is it really a fair election?
Yeah.
It reminds me of the Simpsons episode where they've got the two aliens and saying you do have a choice, but they're exactly the same.
Yeah.
Don't
blame me, I voted for Kodos.
Yeah, that's not a real choice, if you know what I mean. So for me anyway, a lot of it comes down to the first past the post system. It's just a race to get the majority without taking into account that there's a plurality of different opinions and different views, so I think the system itself is really outdated. And even things like the debate last night, the fact that it's styled as though it's a presidential debate, when we don't elect presidents. You elect a representative for your area. So I think it does a disservice to the whole of the UK. So it's an unhealthy situation, I think.
I mean, obviously, you'll be watching the likely incoming Labour government from a beach somewhere.
From my couch.
But I mean, do you feel concerned about the voicelessness of the left at the moment?
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, if the thing that frustrates me as well is that Labour still often portray themselves as being socialist, as being left. And there's nothing socialist about Labour right now. And when it comes to the big issues that are affecting the UK, they are on the same side of the fence as the Conservatives. Granted, they're often a shade saner, but they're still on the same, sort of neoliberal, edging to the right, sort of path. So it's Yeah, it's quite depressing.
But what about the SNP? Where are they in that?
So that's where I think the SNP have actually enjoyed a lot of success over the last 10, 15 years, has been because they've successfully stepped into that sort of left of centre ground, which Labour have been vacating for quite some time. So again, when it comes to the bigger issues, there is a distinction between the SNP and Labour, and there's actually a distinction, I would say, between the Scottish Parliament, particularly when the Greens were still as part of government, and the Westminster system, you know. And again, I think some of that comes down to the fact that the Scottish Parliament has an element of proportional representation in it. It allows for more debate and better quality debate.
So in terms of Scottish independence and the SNP, I just want to share a couple of comments from some of our listeners. Louise Blackstock feels that the SNP are in chaos and is not keen to vote for them at the moment. One of our listeners, Ria, said a big issue for her in the election is Kate Forbes, who's the current Deputy First Minister. The concern is around her views on gay marriage and abortion. And Ria said that she can't bring herself to support a party that would go against its hard work for progressive politics. Meanwhile, Louise Hodgson said, regardless, the single most important issue for her is Scottish independence. So as somebody who's been deeply involved in the SNP for the last half decade, where do you see the current state of the party? And also my kind of follow-up question is the state of the SNP ultimately indivisible from Scottish independence?
So first off, I totally understand, and I don't begrudge anybody, particularly anyone who's part of the LGBT community, for feeling hurt about the SNP, because I think there's a hell of a lot of things, certainly in the last 3-4 years, which shouldn't have happened or should have happened completely differently. Where the difficulty lies is, again, if you're looking at the UK in a Westminster general election and you're seeing that there's a Labour Party and a Tory Party where there's not much difference when it comes to the big issues, all Westminster elections are, to an extent, which is the least evil, in a sense. I get that the waters have been muddied quite a bit since Nicola Sturgeon certainly left. But when push comes to shove, I still don't see how... I don't see any better alternative, certainly in the Westminster elections.
But that's a kind of depressing statement for everybody, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like if essentially every party is saying we're the least depressing alternative, it is depressing if the SNP are also making the offering of we're the least bad option.
Well, when I'm saying that, I still think the SNP have offered a hell of a lot of good things. You know, I wouldn't have been a part of the SNP if I didn't think that. It's just that I suppose we've been enjoying a big level of support, and time will tell whether the party's done enough to nurture that or to maintain that level of trust. But it would be unfair to suggest that there hasn't been a few rocky months, if not years.
How do you feel about Humza Yousaf's resignation and how that all played out?
I mean, I think it was messy in and of itself, and he himself will admit that it wasn't necessarily what he did, it was the way he went about it, what just completely backfired. And I think that's... At times it felt sort of amateurish to an extent, and that's where I think at times the party needs to give itself a kick up the backside and remember why we're involved in this and what's at stake.
Given that there are concerns about Kate Forbes and concerns about the SNP, there are also concerns about Labour's platform, and there are obviously huge concerns about the Conservative attitude to the LGBTQ community as a whole. Do you feel like that community's rights are under threat?
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
Who are they being represented by?
Absolutely. I mean, I think every party has failed to different degrees on this issue in particular, and the advancement of LGBT. Because, I mean, the amount of dog whistles now that are just being said willy-nilly is appalling. It's... And for people my age, I think, where we've grown up and watching the rights being advanced, heading in the right direction, it's quite jarring to be experiencing for the first time, like, oh, right, this is what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're reading, 1980s newspaper clips and going, take out the word gay and put in trans there.
Yeah.
And it's a copy and paste. So, it's terrifying. And I think every party has to step up and do much, much better.
Speaking of terrors,
Yes.
we were discussing the return of Nigel Farage earlier in our show. Like, honestly, him standing, is this significant, or is this just another media story giving him too much airspace, or actually do we really need to look out for this?
Oh, no, I think we need to look out for it, definitely. It doesn't, well, put it this way, I think his numerous TV appearances on all channels over many years is finally paying off,
Yeah.
And he's had such a platform where, even though he's not elected to Westminster and has failed, 7 times or thereabouts, even though he's not elected, he's still successfully managed to drag Britain further to the right. And that's with the platform that the media have given him. What damage is he going to do if he's got the platform of legitimate parliament?
Yeah.
That's what's scary.
Well, he did plenty of damage as an MEP.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And he did plenty of damage to Britain's standing. He's certainly done plenty of damage to this country. But
Totally.
but how do you? This is the question that we, to just be completely upfront with everybody, this is a question that we wrestle with in meetings about this show. To what extent do you just try and ignore him? Because ultimately, Reform have no seats in Parliament. They are given, especially when you consider the number of councillors that the Green Party have, when you consider the number of MPs the SNP and the Liberal Democrats have, it is an astonishing amount of focus to be given to a party with no seats in Parliament, whose ownership structure is still, shall we just say, opaque. Is the responsibility to discuss these ideas, interrogate them and dismiss them, or is there an obligation for us just to ignore this guy and hope he goes away? It feels like a quandary that we all find ourselves in, right?
Yeah.
Progressive people.
And the problem as well is, obviously the idea is like, we air these ideas and then we dismantle them because we reveal that they're completely illogical and don't make fiscal sense, don't make ethical sense or whatever. But at the same time, so much of those policies are not about reason. They appeal to a kind of a fear, I would argue, sort of base, stereotypes, things like that.
Yeah.
How you can't dismantle that in a reasonable way anyway. So is it better to just put them in the box?
The one thing you can't tolerate is those who don't tolerate. It's the kind of...
We're intolerant of intolerance.
Yes. And I don't think the UK is good at doing that at all. And what we're seeing with Nigel Farage is basically Trumpism. He's looked over at his friend and went, oh, that's working, right? And even watching the few interviews he has done where he's just downright rude. But it works because people are feeling bruised. They don't trust politicians. They don't trust Parliament. And finally, there's this, what appears to be this straight-talking guy who drinks a pint, telling it like it is. I think it's a problem with British politics, moreover, where we have slid into this sort of this system where it's slogans that work, where it's personalities that win, rather than it being about policy. I think we need to revisit how we are politically educating people from a young age right the way through to whether it's, media literacy, whether it's social media literacy, whatever it is. I think we have to start dragging it back to policy as opposed to personalities. Giving people the tools to be able to understand, right, how does tax work?
Yeah.
What does non-dom mean? How does the economy work? Because these are the basic things that anybody needs in order to make an informed decision. And in my experience in Westminster is it suits the establishment for people not to understand these things because it allows you to waffle, it allows you to get away with, it's sounding like you're doing something, but in actual fact, you're not doing anything at all.
So listen, obviously, I hope you're going to take a few weeks off.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just now, the only thing that's solid in the pipeline is a show at the Edinburgh Fringe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing the whole run. It's called Politics Isn't For Me. Get your tickets, £13, right?
Yeah, the Gilded Balloon. I'll see you there.
Yeah.
I'm there the whole month. Coco's coming up for a couple of days. We're doing
Perfect.
some live shows. It's
Perfect.
great. Yeah, I'm very excited for you to experience doing a full Edinburgh Fringe run.
Well,
it's a lot of fun.
it was funny talking beforehand, saying, there'll be a lot of drunk people. And I'm like, I'm used to having a room full of people who've had a liquid lunch shouting at me. Honestly, it's all good.
Mhairi Black, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
thanks
thank you
for
so
having
much.
You may have heard that last week America made history. The bad kind, that is. Donald Trump became the first US president to be convicted of 34 felony crimes.
But somehow, this guy is still leading the 2024 presidential election polls.
So head over to Pod Save America to keep tabs on this mess. Stay informed. New episodes drop every Tuesday, Wednesday and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. All right, everyone, it is time for another round of Pod Save the UK's WTF moments.
Which I will refuse to coyly refer to as WTF moments because we're allowed to swear on this show and we'll continue to refer to as WT fuck moments. It's been another week of ridiculous moments, but here are some of the best. We'll start with the deplatformed leader of a right-wing party. You know who we mean. We won't show it, but just imagine in your mind's eye, that man soaked in milkshake at the launch of his campaign event. What a great way to kick things off.
Sunak's handlers have been working overtime to ensure the PM doesn't stand next to any exit signs or in any Morrisons to avoid any more undesirable shots. But the PM managed to get photobombed by the Liberal Democrats while campaigning in Henley in this clip from ITV News.
So, Rishi Sunak is having a conversation with some voters in Henley, and just in the background, on the river, a boat festooned with Liberal Democrat signs is just passing. And I'm afraid to say, in a review of Mr. Sunak's charisma, the ITV News camera filming it has simply moved away from his face and zoomed in on the Liberal Democrats on a boat. It does not speak well of his charisma that even the camera operator just thought, I think people are going to want to see the Lib Dems on a boat. Next, the Tory candidate for High Peak, Robert Largan, is in hot water as the police investigate claims of electoral fraud. Largan has tweeted campaign images. It's quite hard to even believe the words that are about to come out of my mouth. Using the colours of Labour red and Reform teal, with slogans including Labour for Largan and Reform for Robert. In a tweet promoting the Labour post, Largan writes, "So many local Labour voters have told me they're going to vote for me because they want to keep me as their local MP. There have been so many that I'm launching a new Labour for Largan club." What, in a way, is there a more damning indictment of the Conservative Party at the moment than its own candidates are pretending they're members of other parties?
I love that he's like, oh, I'm launching a new Labour for Largan club. Not that someone else had already launched it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, you're launching it and no one will attend and it will just be you in a church hall with some cups of tea going cold. But apparently that seems to be enough to justify this obvious tactic.
It's also, we should say, there is writing at the bottom of the images that reveal it's a Conservative Party campaign material. But honestly, the writing is so hilariously... I didn't know it was possible to have minus 0.04 point font.
And it's like white on a colour you can't really read.
It definitely looks like it says something like may cause vaginal dryness.
Yeah.
To return to the weird motif of this campaign that is established on this podcast.
Again, I am concerned about the aunties listening to this show and their opinion of it.
May cause penile softness.
Also this week, we've had Labour channeling Adam McKay to deliver John Richardson in a bathtub.
Do you know what Rishi Sunak did before he got into politics?
No.
Well, you're not supposed to. Rishi Sunak would love for you to forget about how he made his millions before becoming an MP. He wants you to think it's too complicated to understand, or even better, that it isn't notable at all. So here's John Richardson in a bubble bath to explain.
Basically, before Rishi Sunak got into politics, he was a partner in a hedge fund. Now, that was amazingly profitable for him, but bad for pretty much everyone else. Think the opposite of Robin Hood.
Yes, that video shared from Labour HQ is paying homage to the famous explainer scene on how to short markets from Adam McKay's 2015 film The Big Short with Margot Robbie in a bubble bath. The film explores the traders who made loads of money during the 2008 global financial crisis. Rico, love him. He's not exactly Margot Robbie. It's not a one-for-one swap.
I mean, definitely the shots of the beer falling into the bathtub was not the sort of, oh, it's sexy and titillating like Margot Robbie. It was more like, oh, unhygienic, slight disgust. But, you know, a very, very, very informative video.
And to finish it off, probably our favourite clip of the week, maybe of the year so far. Here's Sky News' Sophie Ridge and Sam Coates delivering some news to Tory MP Grant Shapps.
Sophie, Grant Shapps is phoning me.
Take the call.
Yeah, that's
Grant
a good idea.
Shapps is just calling Sam Coates. So it's on his Apple phone. Give him a little minute to get it up, but he is going to take it now.
Hello, Grant Shapps. You're live on Sky News. I'm in the studio with Sophie Ridge. Have you just seen that you're about to lose your seat according to the Sky News YouGov projection? He just put the phone down on me. There we go.
Right. So much to talk about there. What on earth?
Why was he phoning?
Well, has Grant Shapps butt dialed Sam Coates whilst he's live on the news? It is absolutely unfathomable. It's if he butt dialed Sam Coates whilst furiously screaming at the television. Or maybe he has voice recognition and he was screaming some string of profanity about Sam Coates and his voice assistant went, calling Sam Coates.
Don't make me feel sorry for him.
Oh, I don't. To be clear, Grant Shapps losing his job is one of the funniest things that can happen. But if you look into Grant Shapps' history, you'll know the man is not short of jobs. He's done many jobs in his career, often at the same time. And so if he loses this one, he'll just go back to whatever job he's also doing at the same time.
And that's it. Thanks for listening to Pod Safety UK.
Now, if you have any news from your own backyard or any other comments you want to share or topics you want us to look into, email us at psuk@reducedlistening.co.uk. We really love to hear your voices. So if you're feeling brave and want to ask us a question, send us a voice note on WhatsApp. Our number is 07494 933 444. Internationally, that's +44 7494 933 444.
Don't forget to follow at PodSaveTheUK on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter. You can also find us on YouTube for access to full episodes and drop us a review if you like.
Unless we dry out your vagina or soften your peen. Pod Safety UK is a reduced listing production for Crooked Media.
Thanks to senior producer James Tyndale, as well as digital producer and video editor Nada Smilinic.
Our theme music is by Vasilis Fotopoulos.
Thanks to our engineer Alex Bennett.
The executive producers are Anishka Sharma, Dan Jackson and Madeline Herringer, with additional support from Ari Schwartz.
Remember to hit subscribe for new shows on Thursdays on Amazon, Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts.